Hey everybody, welcome back to Cast Your Nets. This is your host, BigTuna. And so you might notice this episode is a little different. This is episode 8, and we're doing what's called Tuna Talks. These are solo episodes that I'll do, and these will be different from the usual course of what we do on the podcast, which is biblical exposition with guests, which is really fruitful, and we'll have some more of those coming up soon. But, that being said, we're going to have some of these individual episodes where I kind of talk to the audience about what's been on my mind or what I find pressing and that I don't really think can be covered with an article, and that I don't want to, I don't want to waste time forcing my unmade ideas onto a guest in the context of a biblical episode. So that's what we're doing today. And we're talking about bad historiography, especially in the online right, but just something that people do more generally and broadly, because I think people have bad history, and because they have bad history, they commit great abuses with their rhetoric and with their argument in advancing their political cause. And obviously, the critique of the left is in great hatred because the left is evil, and the critique of the right, I hope, will be much kinder because I want the good guys to win. I just want the good guys to not have terrible history. And so I'm calling this Puppeteers of the Dead. That was the idea for a Substack article. And why do I say that? Part of it was conversations across Twitter and Substack with various random people, and with ideas that I had seen floating around that just don't make any sense. So, for example, there was this G.K. Chesterton quote about individualism being kind of heretical or bad or whatever, capital I individualism, and had its terrible outcome in Puritanism. And communitarianism, communism, capital C communism, it's paganism. Communism is pagan, Puritanism is individual, and so on and so forth. And, he's trying to set himself and the things he believes, Catholicism namely, up as a middle ground between two extremes. And I pointed out this is idiotic. Actually, beyond the stupid Puritan sniping that a lot of people do, which is borderline not even worth addressing, the idea that paganism somehow leads to communism is just totally idiotic. All of the original communists were, in some ways, people who had departed from the mainstream and the norm in Europe, which was Christianity. And the way that they departed from that was not by turning to Nordic paganism, by doing things that, online LARPers sort of do, where they look for some way out. They look way, way into the past. Maybe the mistake the West made that got us to this point, maybe the mistake way back was the West embracing Christianity, despite the fact that all of the West's greatest heights and accomplishments happened under Christendom. Despite all of that, they're like, maybe Christianity is the problem, maybe Norse paganism or Celtic paganism or the paganisms of the people of the East, maybe these things have something to say to us and are more relevant in helping us accomplish today's goals. That is not what the original communists did. The original communists, obviously, if you're talking about people actually in the stream of Marx, Marx himself saw history as one long struggle of classes, of competing interests, of haves and have-nots. And he saw religion, and what's funny is he kind of universalizes, when he says religion is the opium or the opiate of the masses, he is not just talking about Christianity. He is talking about Christianity because in the 19th century, it is the predominant religion in his day, but he's talking about all religions. He says in his sort of account of prehistory, which is really the way he does it is pseudo-history. But he's saying, all the priestly classes of these religions, these people set up a system by which they were able to extract from the labor of others. So, any priesthood is bad. Paganism is bad. And Christianity is bad, and they're all bad. And the only way that you could actually get a real communist or Marxist to like paganism would be to juxtapose it against Christianity. And like, okay, Mr. Marxist, I've locked you in. There's no more option to embrace atheism. Atheism is dead. It has too many metaphysical problems or historical problems. So atheism is gone, Mr. Marxist. You can't choose. You can only pick between paganism and Christianity. Those are your only two options. Then, yes, probably in all likelihood, the Marxist would pick paganism. Then only then at that point would they descend to that sort of stupidity. But it's obviously wrong when Chesterton, who I like, and who has lots of other things to say, but when Chesterton says, "Oh, paganism leads to communism," no, it doesn't. That literally never happened. And this is what I mean by bad historiography, by being a puppeteer of the dead. You are taking the voices of the past. You are animated corpses that cannot speak for themselves or defend themselves in any way, and you are making them say, literally a sick ventriloquism, you're making them say what you want them to say so that your priors can be justified. And this is a quip from G.K. Chesterton. It's probably one or two sentences, so it's really not that. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it is a big deal in the sense that everyone on the right and really pretty much the entire left does this. They do this thing with historiography. What is historiography for people who don't know? Historiography is how you write history, how you analyze history. So Marx and Marx's history, his materialist history, he has his own version of history. This is the way events play out. All these events that you know about that happened in the past, capital H history, X happened in Y place at Z time with A, B, and C people, nation, armies, whatever, blah, 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 blah. That's history. Historiography is taking those historical events and saying, okay, here's a commonality or a pattern or, that presents itself. Or this is my theory of how history works. And you can see it work itself out in all these ways. The great man theory of history. We hear about this on the right. The great man. Thomas Carlyle. The only people who really move history along are people who are so particularly excellent and above all of the rest of humanity that they themselves, they're the only people, it's like history is this giant gear. It's like Big Ben. It's a huge clock with all these pieces, and there's one gear that you can push to get the whole thing going and turn it. That's what history is. And only the extremely strong, aka the most excellent, the great man, is actually able to push the gear a little bit to get it going and then get it going fast enough so that history can spin again. And once the great man dies, the wheel of history slows down. It is no longer spinning until the next great man can come up and make the clock of history spin. I've just made this up. This isn't like how Thomas Carlyle talks about the great man theory of history. But you get the point. And there are many different kinds of histories like this. And so the right, understandably, the right has found itself, particularly, I don't even want to bother with, really what we're talking about here is what has happened to, quote unquote, the West. And I've talked about this before when people use the term the West today to talk about today's context. It's actually a virtually meaningless term. The West could mean a few things. One, you could mean the West as in there was once some kind of unified European identity under Christendom that was split in two by the Great Schism, and the West is all those countries which are on the Catholic side of the Catholic Orthodox split, and that is the West. More broadly, the West is just those peoples. Maybe it preexists the conception of Christendom. Those peoples who are broadly European, they're white. Those people are the West. And that, by the way, is like probably the only definition that makes any sense today if you actually use the term West. Or the West in sort of the Cold War framing, the West is all those nations which are allied with liberal democracy against the forces of the East. And what are the forces of the East? Of Orientalism, of communism, of socialism, and market control. The East is evil, or whatever. And the West is all those countries which allied against the Soviets, and it is by this kind of strange framing that you can get a country like Israel, which is not the West at all, or by any previous definition of the West, until the Cold War framing, and then you can say, okay, maybe Israel's the West, despite the fact that They weren't like particularly allies of Western countries against the Soviets, and that there was that they didn't help in any wars against the Soviets or any conflicts, and in many ways created their own worst enemy during the Suez Crisis. Okay, but the point being is that these historiographical frames, they can be somewhat useful, but they can also just be totally wrong, like literally completely wrong about history and how it happened. So one thing is to look at someone who is building a historiographical frame and say, okay, they said all these things about the past and these patterns would happen. So what is happening forward from them? What happens after their time? So what does Marx say in 1848? He says that the most industrialized countries will be the first to fall to these sort of workers' revolutions. Why? Why will the most industrialized countries be the first to fall? Because the most industrialized countries, those that have experienced the Industrial Revolution, will have dispossessed and upset too many of the have-nots. It will have accelerated the gains of the haves too much, and eventually it will just be a numbers game, and the have-nots will kind of overtake the haves. To be more precise, the proletariat will take over and attack the bourgeoisie, and then you will have a communist revolution. Okay, what actually happened after Marx? After Marx and the sort of the year of revolution, 1848, the year that he publishes the Communist Manifesto, I don't know if he wrote it entirely during that year. I think he had been writing it before. What actually happens? Conservative Europe is forced to make a couple of concessions, and the concessions that the ruling classes in Europe decide to make, for the most part, and obviously this completely depends on which country you're in, but for the most part, democratic movements, liberal movements are strengthened. They're given compensation. Okay, you know what? Maybe we can make this work. Maybe the conservative old guard, maybe the old European monarchies can survive with small concessions to the liberals. Why? Because there was simply too much momentum, too much, well, frankly, elite power, too much of the press, too much money, too much everything. All of public perception was going one way. So you know what? We might as well make concessions to the liberals. On the other hand, the socialists after 1848, the real socialists, were brutally suppressed. There's too many contradictions within socialism and the broader movement itself. This is Bakunin and Marx having their fallout. This sucks. If you're a socialist in 1848, you're probably pretty helpful. By 1858, you're probably not very helpful. You probably think everything is kind of not going according to plan. You probably think everything sucks. And maybe, this whole socialist project is worth completely leaving behind. What happens? You sort of finally get something going in, the socialists try and get something going in Germany. Bismarck totally crushes them in kind of a two-pronged approach. One is stealing some of the things which they promised to give to the people. The socialist parties promised all these workers' bonuses, and so you know what Bismarck did? He just gave the workers' bonuses to industrial workers. And then what he did was heavily restrict the press and the flow of socialist parties so that they were basically completely defeated within Germany before he left, which, that's a whole nother story. Whereas you have somewhere like Russia, where the state, the state is ruling according to this three-pronged attack. And what is this three-pronged attack? What is this thing that gives Russia its what is Russian nationalism essentially at the end of the 19th century? It's orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality. What does that mean? The first part is pretty self-explanatory. Orthodoxy, meaning total adherence to Orthodox doctrine, and really not even doctrine. It's not even we got to make sure that all the people that are within the Russian Empire, all these disparate peoples, the more European peoples, the more Asiatic peoples, we have to make sure that they all understand Orthodox theology and doctrine. No, not really. It's not so much that. It's adherence to the Orthodox Church, and whatever the Orthodox Church, the mouth of the church says, is what goes. Then there's autocracy, which is total adherence to the monarchy, to the Tsardom, to the Romanovs. And then you have nationality. And nationality meaning We're building an identity. If you're a part of the Russian Empire, you are going to be a Russian. And this is, this last part, it's really the first two that matter much more. It's really orthodoxy, autocracy that matter. Nationality is hard because Russia is an actual empire, a real empire. And there are lots of disparate ethnic peoples within the empire. But it did mean doing things like establishing a more official Russian written language over the whole of the empire and things like that. And so what happens? Which country is the first to fall to a communist revolution? It's the country with orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality. The least industrialized country in all of Europe, like not even close, is the Russian Empire during this time. And it is the first to fall to communism. Why? Why does this happen? Part of it is Marx is an idiot, and he's totally wrong about how history would work. He did have devoted disciples. He did have certain insights, which maybe make him valuable in certain ways. But communism never gets off the ground without Lenin. Lenin is the one who makes it an actual thing that exists in history. That is, there actually was such a thing as the United Soviet Socialist Republics. That was real. That actually did have an ideology. It was united around an ideology. It was united basically around nothing more than the power of the Politburo, around nothing more than the power of the party. And what is the actual, I should say this, it was united around the power of the party. What was the thing that united the party? The Politburo. What united the Politburo? First among equals. Who was first among equals? It was Lenin. And then later on it becomes Stalin. And we see how that breaks down. But this is proof that Marx has a totally wrong historiographical frame. Maybe not everything is class conflict. Maybe certain countries have classes organized much differently than one another. Maybe, and this is another thing, trads want to talk all the time, more traditional right-wing people want to talk about how, the Industrial Revolution all it did was dispossess everyone. Okay, not really true in certain cases. Like, the Industrial Revolution goes over far better in certain countries than others. And certain countries that didn't embrace, the Industrial Revolution, which maybe is like what traditionalists want. Maybe we never should have just done the Industrial Revolution at all. Maybe we should have just, put our feet in the ground and stuck with our traditions. How did that work out? How did that work out for the Tsardom? It led to getting their butts whooped in multiple foreign conflicts. It led to huge domestic upheaval. It led to extreme radicals taking over in every facet of politics and of social life, of the undermining of the church, and eventually to the very execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his family, himself and his family. It led to loss. Traditionalists lost. This is the thing. This is another problem I have with the online right, this drive toward traditionalism, which, by the way, in many cases is good. It's people who are completely deracinated, who don't have a real culture, because there is no real culture today, who are looking for answers in the past. This is a good thing to do. This is a great instinct. I have nothing but respect for this instinct. But when it is not refined correctly, when it goes down the wrong path, you're not really doing anything. You're not accomplishing your political goals. You're not becoming, you're not re-rooting yourself into the ground. You're not rooting yourself to something real. You're rooting yourself to something that is just as fake as the fake thing that the left has created today. It's fake without the gay, essentially. Instead of being fake and gay like everything is now, it's just fake. If you're a LARPer, if you're like, I'm a Russian czarist, okay, sorry, it's dead. It's never coming back. It is not happening. If it is never ever coming back. If you're like a huge monarchist and you're like, I don't know, let's say you're British and you're waiting for this is too ridiculous to even say. If you're waiting for Charles III to sort of wake up and disband Parliament and reclaim the British Empire and bring it back to its days of past glory or whatever, not happening. Literally not happening. So there is no realistic path through these forms that are emptied of their substance. What's hilarious about the orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality is how hypocritical in Russia, the czars and the boyars and the upper classes of Russia, how hypocritical they were in pursuing this. So let's say orthodoxy. A ton of them, A ton of them ended up being atheists or leaving for like Western churches, mostly Roman Catholic churches. It wasn't like they became Protestant. Autocracy. A lot of them moved. Before we get to the next point, the Orthodoxy, the first leg of this uniting idea that sort of 19th century Russia embraced, Orthodoxy. A lot of them were also Freemasons, which you're not supposed to do if you're Orthodox. Autocracy. A bunch of them were closet liberals. A bunch of them were friends with the Alexander Kerenskys of the world. Some of them, because there were so many double agents with the I can't even remember the name now. I'm laughing too hard. The secret police of the Russian Tsardom. There were so many double agents that a lot of these people who were like secretly working for the Tsarist government, who would infiltrate these commune meetings, which were the original party communes. Each city in Russia had a commune, and these all coordinated with the central commune. And it is from the central commune that Lenin sort of controlled the communist revolution. So there are like Russian Tsarist secret police agents infiltrating these meetings, and they would go and they would be like, oh, actually, there's some great points being made. Or final point, nationality. Like, at least try to uphold your empire, at least try to pay lip service to it by, using the Russian alphabet, speaking Russian language, everything else. What was the predominant language of the upper classes of the Russian Empire? French! They all got educated in Paris. Like, none of them actually believed it. And so if you're actually trying to go back to this traditionalism, if you're actually trying to build something useful, something that will help you win, something that will help you defeat the left, preserve the way of life for your people, if you're trying to look to the past, you should probably know which kinds of traditionalism already failed. You should know something about history. You should be able to draw conclusions from it. And you can't have, these really stupid framings that right-wingers have a lot of the time. And, I was just railing on Marx. Like, this is the stupidity of leftist history, is that, first of all, like, even in making this critique, this is essentially a narrow critique. Not everyone reads history. In fact, scratch that. Almost nobody reads history. And so if almost nobody reads history, then I'm talking to a small group of people who actually kind of do in some way, or are basically familiar with the long stretch of their own people's history, of Western or European or essentially white history. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm already talking to a small group of people. So, you already know some of these things. So why are we LARPing and pretending that we're medieval monarchists or something? Like, these movements existed and they ran their course and they died out. So you either have to think about how are we going to rework our political system so that we can once again resemble those forms because those forms led to a better substance, or you have to say, actually, no, those forms, when they were met with new and different problems, the new and different problems of the 19th century compared to the 15th or 16th century, maybe the form became emptied of its substance and became useless. Maybe that's what happened. And so maybe we need to evolve and find some other way around the problem. So, like, this is my problem. That is basically, to summarize everything, that is my problem with bad historiography on the right. So what is my problem with monarchism? Not that monarchism is bad. Actually, monarchism has a ton of advantages. Certain kinds of monarchism are literally blessed by God so that, for example, David, his line is literally blessed to live as kings forever through Jesus, his part of his lineage. Like, David is so blessed that his eventual lineage leads to the physical man, Jesus, who is also God. Like, that is how blessed David is. So this is not railing against monarchy. This is railing against living vicariously through figures of the past. What you want to do is relitigate history so that you can put yourself into a situation that you're familiar with. Perfect example, the American Civil War. You want to be a Confederate. Oh, evil Lincoln, the tyrant Lincoln. He's going to ruin America because he's going to bring, however many 100,000 Irish immigrants, and he's going to destroy America. Or because he destroyed the long-standing chattel slavery, whatever, system in the South. Okay, doesn't have any bearing on the actual problems of the day. Like, what are the problems of our day? I've said this before in many other places, and I'm going to say it again. The main thing animating the spirit of today's age, the number one lie that people are called to embrace by the world, by forces of sin and darkness, is that all people are the same. There is no difference between men and women. There is no difference between races. Race doesn't even exist. Gender doesn't even exist. There are no differences between people. There are not more or less talented people. Everyone is equally loved. This is how we sort of get hippie Jesus. Oh, God is love, and so therefore love is the only thing that matters, and there's nothing else other than love. And also, love and hate are opposites. So don't ever think about all the parts of the Bible where it says God hates, and certainly don't ever draw the conclusion that God has favorites, that God has a favorite people that He picks out of all the earth, that He has favorite particular people. He says in one of the parts of the Bible, I was talking about this with someone recently. He says in one of the parts of the Bible, when he's talking about the destruction of Israel, he says that even if Moses and Daniel were here, basically, even if Moses and Daniel were here asking for my mercy, asking for me to preserve these people, I would not do it. I would wipe everyone out. That's interesting. Why does he mention those two? I'm fairly certain it's Moses and Daniel. I can't remember the latter. Moses was definitely one of them. But let's just stick with Moses. Why does he say, out of all these people, all these characters we read about in the Bible who have all these wonderful things about them, why does it say Moses in particular? Even if Moses said, God, will you please do this, I would still wipe these people out. Why does he say that? Is he picking favorites? Yes, actually he is. Like Moses was granted the extreme blessing and honor of having his own life animated by the presence of God in a time before God had yet poured out his Spirit on all people who would accept him. Moses literally would go into the tabernacle, and when he came out, he had to wear a veil because his face was shining so bright, and that Moses was particularly beloved by the Lord. Even Jesus, when has his ministry on earth, he picks the apostles out of all the people of Israel, and out of he says these 12, these people are the ones who I love the most. And out of those 12, he has a most beloved, John the Beloved. And that is not just a self-christened title, that's actually a truth. So this is the one thing that the world requires you to say, is that actually everyone is the same. There is no difference between peoples. God does not pick favorites. Everything's about love and like getting along and the power of friendship. My Little Pony, rainbow explosion, whatever. That is the problem of your day and age. The problem of your day and age is not whether or not Lincoln is a tyrant, whether or not Puritans are bad and like no one should ever rebel because it brings the state of nature upon us or something. So no, Charles the First, you have to do whatever he says even though he's a retard. Or we need to go undo the Reformation. This is the thinking of the right. Like, it's all been over since X. It has all been over since the Civil Rights Movement. It has all been over since the Civil War. It has all been over since the American or French Revolution. It has all been over since the Reformation. It's all been over since they frickin' added the Filioque to the creed. It was over. No, it's not over. People are still alive. It isn't over until God says it's over, until God closes the book of history and says, that's enough. I'm done writing the story. Because people still live here after we're gone. It's actually all this criticism of boomers, and we can't recognize the one thing that boomers always do, which is believe that their own time is the only one that matters. And that nothing comes after them. Well, it was all over before me, so why should I even try? I should just do whatever I want. No, things still matter. Good things can still be accomplished. Tremendous missteps and evils can still happen. It can always get worse. It can always get better. And so this is the thing. There are no more Soviets. There are no more Nazis. There are no more Confederates. There are no more Puritans. Just like there are no more Babylonians or Romans. The environmental pressures that created these people don't exist. Or if they do exist in extremely diminished capacity. So this is the one thing I don't want people to do, is go to the graveyard of history, dig up a corpse, friggin' jolt it with electricity, go full Frankenstein, make it jiggle around and do a dance and say, see, this person was the greatest of all time. If only everyone would have listened to this person, then we'd be great. Or if only, we could have avoided this one evil person who said all these stupid things that I don't like and disagree with, then everything would be fine today. It's stupid. Do not be a puppeteer of the dead. Do not engage in stupid historiography. Please do the reading in many cases. Don't necessarily, just because people are on your side, quote unquote. Nobody even knows what that means, by the way. Like apparently the only qualification for being a right winger is being anti-modern, and that's it. And that's how you get this sort of weird, for all this dissident criticism of, the Trump coalition is so broad and large, it can't possibly believe anything, and MAGA is fake and gay, and whatever. No, dissidents are fake and gay. How is it possible to share a coalition with people who are like Julius Evola, Euro-pagan supremacists who believe that everything has been over since the West was Christianized? How is it possible for me as an American Protestant who goes to church every week, who actually does believe in God and who voted for Trump? Like, what is the actual thing uniting me with those people? Nothing. Literally nothing. Other than the fact that we're both not members of the left. And so the two impulses are to say, well, actually, because you disagree with me, you are a member of the left. This sort of stupid, like James Lindsay woke right thing. Or it's to sort of ignore the contradiction and just say, you know what, let's just get this done and out of the way. We can table our differences, which are actually existential differences, and which the only reason we're in a coalition, ironically enough, is because of propaganda. But, we just need to table our differences and defeat the left already. We need to do that. Okay, I agree. But how are we going to do that? How are things actually accomplished? What does it even mean to be a student of history? Frankly, a lot of the time, I'm not sure if anyone else feels this way. History can't actually tell you what to do because there are no one-to-one comparisons. But even when they are, you're trying to draw out a lesson. You're like Solomon splitting the baby. Was there a part of Leviticus that told you to split a baby when two prostitutes had a disagreement? No, it's a matter of wisdom and knowledge and prudence. And so you should. I do think that you should read history. I do think that you should collect some sort of knowledge for yourself. But do not engage in this sort of stupidity that was so irritating to me that I had to create a solo podcast that has now gone over half an hour. Don't do something that is this stupid, that frankly undermines your own point. It doesn't make you more appealing to disgruntled members of the left. It does a very poor job in uniting the right. It's false, and falsehoods, as a proponent of what is true, falsehoods will always destroy whatever it is you're trying to build. You have to say true things. You have to not say cliched things. You actually have to think through what it is that you're saying about history, about politics, about philosophy, about theology, about religion, about living together. You actually, before you do any history, you have to think about what it is that I am trying to do. Why am I a political observer at all? Why do I even care about history? And once you have answered those questions, then we can sort of get into, X event happened because of Y reasons. Then we can engage in historiography. We have to do it without parodying people. We have to do it without being puppeteers of the dead. And so that is the very short message that I have for you today. I hope it wasn't too much rambling. I just had a couple notes, and I just wanted to get it all out there. But for now, this has been the 8th episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening. I will get guests very soon. We'll be talking about many different parts of the Bible, which I'm quite excited to do. I will actually eventually get that article on Jack F. Matlock's book on the Soviet Union. I've just been, I just finished college, and I've been working to start the summer, so I've actually had less free time working than at school, and so I just haven't had time to do this. But I will try and be a little bit better about being consistent about releasing the podcast. So this is your host, BigTuna. We'll see you guys next time.